Right, good evening, everybody. I think we're going to make a start. My name's Johann Tasker. I'll just go through a few sort of housekeeping notes at the beginning. Thank you very much for coming. We've got about an hour and a quarter. It will be recorded for audio and subsequently released as a podcast. It will also be filmed and put on YouTube. We will be doing video clips as well. There will, in addition to that, be a number of pages in Farmers Weekly. I don't know how many, 3 or 4 pages, 3 pages in Farmers Weekly next week. So we'll be writing it up. I believe the people. So thank you very much to everybody who submitted questions. The people who are going to ask those questions should know who they are. You will, if you've not been selected to ask a question, you will still have the opportunity to interact with our panel. The other thing to say is it's very much about, I know we've got a panel of experts here, but this is very much about the audience rather than just the panel. So we do like to see some kind of audience interaction. Pop your hand up if you want to. It's exactly the same as you see on the telly, but obviously you've got me and not Fiona Bruce or whoever it might be. So that's more or less where we are. It's a friendly evening, but don't. So just remember that. But that doesn't mean to say you can't ask tough questions. But yeah, go for the argument rather than the person. But we've never had any problems yet. This is the first one that we've done in our second series. So we've done 4 of these before now. So that's sort of where we are. Right, I don't think there's any fire alarms planned. Afterwards, there are refreshments and nibbles for those of you who want to stay on, which always seems to be popular with students, free alcohol. Anyway, right. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Farmers Weekly Question Time event here in the Agriculture Building at Newcastle University in the heart of Newcastle upon Tyne. A warm welcome to you all. I'm your host, Johann Tasker, and I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture and Lightsource BP, for making this evening possible. And thank you too to Newcastle University for hosting us. The Faculty of Science, Agriculture and Engineering here at Newcastle is one of the largest in the UK, with over 8,000 students and 1,200 staff. The faculty has a world-class reputation, steeped in history dating back to 1871, and an annual turnover of £150 million. But this is no academic ivory tower. The university also has mud on its boots. It runs 2 local commercial farms, its own research, teaching and engagement platform totalling some 800 hectares, which brings us nicely onto our panel of experts who'll be answering your questions this evening, and they too have varying amounts of mud on their boots as well. On my far left, James Standen is Farms Director for Newcastle University Farms, which include a commercial dairy herd, a pig unit and arable enterprises. James also farms in partnership with his wife on a tenanted arable and livestock farm with a holiday let and fishing lakes. He sits on the NFU Combinable Crops Board, is a member of the Farm Management Board at Plumpton College and is a council member of the Institute of Agricultural Management. Next to James and on my immediate left is Julia Aglionby. Julia is a land agent, Professor of Practice at Cumbria University and the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate for Penrith and Solway. Specialising in commons and hill farming, she served on the board of Natural England and chaired the Uplands Alliance until deciding to run for Parliament. At home, Julia is trustee of Susan's Farm, a care farm where she assists with livestock duties. Turning to my immediate right, we have Nicholas Saphir. Nicholas is chairman of the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, the levy body which represents farmers, growers and others in the supply chain. He has vast experience in the industry, including 18 years building the Organic Milk Producers Cooperative, OMSCO, into the world's second largest dedicated organic milk co-op. He was also founding chair of Food from Britain, president of the Fresh Produce Consortium and chair of the Agricultural Forum. Next to Nicholas, we have Northumberland beef and sheep farmer John Renner. John farms on the edge of Northumberland National Park between Berwick-upon-Tweed and Alnwick. A leaf demonstration farmer for over 20 years, John says he's focusing on soil fertility to make the family business as sustainable as possible while maximising output through efficiencies. And next to John, on my far right, we have Ellen Holmes. Ellen is Partnership Coordinator for Food Newcastle, an independent non-profit group of organisations and individuals demanding a healthier food culture in Newcastle upon Tyne. Passionate about the importance of sustainable local food, Ellen is determined to tackle food insecurity and food poverty while supporting local people and businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please put your hands together and give our panel a big Newcastle University welcome. And we'll go straight into our first question, which is Brett Askew.
Is Red Tractor still fit for purpose?
Is the Red Tractor Farm Assurance Scheme still fit for purpose? More controversial question than it might at first appear, given recent developments which has seen Red Tractor asking farmers, or giving farmers the opportunity to prove their environmental credentials through a greener farm commitment, which it says is going to be necessary, but which many farmers feel is going to cost them money and only benefit retailers. So is Red Tractor still fit for purpose? Nick Saphir.
Right. Yeah, it's highly appropriate. Not only have they done that, but the NFU have just announced, and some of you won't know that, but they are very unhappy about how that came about. The National Sheep Association's called for a governance review, and we have this week announced that as AHDB that we're doing 2 particular studies on cereals and oilseeds and on sheep meat and beef in terms of assurance. But come back directly to your question. Let me just start with assurance. Assurance is absolutely vital at a time when we are heading towards a very competitive world where we have to recognise that other countries have standards and many of them do assure. And we've got to maintain our reputation. So I start from the point of view that assurance is necessary. That doesn't mean just Red Tractor. I mean, Leaf, of which we have John here, who's a demonstration farm, is very, very, very successful and very important. I think, though, that there are 3 things that are coming out of all of this at the moment, and I welcome it. I think we're going to have a big debate now. I think, first of all, I hope we don't get bogged down with this environmental module and say, by the way, it will be voluntary, but I hope we don't get bogged down with who agreed what. But the problem for many farmers is that a voluntary arrangement, a voluntary assurance module around environment might become, in the end, a necessity. It might morph into becoming a part of a general base standard, and that means that there won't be an additional payment for it. So I think that's a worry for many people. I think there are parts of the module that need to be debated as well. But secondly, I think that the assurance has to be proportionate, it has to be relevant, and it has to deliver value, because otherwise it won't maintain the farmers who are the baseline to it. And the problem we have at this moment in time is that the debate has not yet happened and will now happen around whether some parts of British agriculture, which are unhappy about Red Tractor, whether they can have their say and whether in fact their problems can be dealt with. And that's why I come back to the 2 points I made at the beginning we're doing, and that is on cereals and oilseeds and on sheep. On cereals and oilseeds, there's been a long-going question about whether or not British cereals going into the trade is because it has to go through the trade and has to conform to standards which are imposed by the trades body, which is AIC. And the argument is for many cereal producers, we have to go through hoops that imports don't have to go through. And it costs us money. Now the question is that myth or is that reality? And what we've done and what we announced yesterday and is that we will be actually appointing independent consultants as AHDB to have a look at the real standards to which imports are controlled and what due diligence does take place, and whether or not our assurance schemes are proportionate in dealing with that. Now that's going to be an evidence-based, by the end of this year, an evidence-based piece of work that is going to allow the debate to happen properly. And that's really important because it's festering. The other one is sheep, particularly sheep and beef, but sheep, where 50% of our sheep do not go through multiples in this country, and therefore to multiple supermarkets, and therefore when their product goes on the counter, whether it be in a small butcher, whether it be halal, whether it be exports, it doesn't actually mean anything to them that it is Red Tractor certified. And they argue that they don't have to be certified, and why should they be? And the reason they have to be certified is because the abattoirs require them to have the same standards as everything else going through the abattoir to prevent complexity. And that's a discussion that we have to have as well. And we are actually embarked, we announced some time ago, embarked on a review of whether international standards, Australia and New Zealand, America, whether those standards are better, worse than ours. What is the reality? And therefore, what is proportionate in terms of assurance? So the answer to that question, I think, is this. Assurance is critical for our future. It has to be proportionate, it has to be relevant, and it has to add value. Otherwise, farmers will not be able to take on the responsibilities. To do that, we need to have facts. And we've done it to a great extent on an emotional burst that it's good, it's going to produce results. We now have to start delving deeply and saying, where is the cost benefit? And I hope at the end of it, we end up with a very much stronger assurance scheme in this country, because I think it's very important.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. John Renner, as a beef and sheep farmer, Red Tractor still fit for purpose for you?
I don't understand. I never understand people knocking assurance schemes. Assurance schemes are there to protect the consumer at all costs, but also it should add value to the producer as well. I was fortunate enough for 3 years to sit on the technical advisory committee for the Leaf Mark, and it opened my eyes to how assurance schemes are set up and laid out. And I realised that, although I was committed to it anyway, that a commitment to farming with the environment and giving the best product to the consumer had to be foremost. I think within the UK, if we can look at it as farmers and say it's going to add value, it's going to benefit all the systems that we have, and we're going to be able to work closer with the new payment schemes that are coming forward if we start working with the environmental complexities that are being laid out by Red Tractor. It'll benefit for us in the long term.
Thank you, John. Julia Aglionby.
Thanks very much. Well, at home, where I'm very pro-assurance, we're both PFLA, pasture-fed livestock, and Soil Association certified, which are standards significantly in excess of the requirements of Red Tractor. And we do that because, A, we believe it in the way of farming, but B, it provides a premium and it provides assurance to our customers. We sell all our meat direct. So I think that this is the key, is that we're providing, as farmers, we're producing food, and it's the consumers, the customers who are buying that, and they need to know it's of a good quality. And the way that Lib Dems see this is we provide that as a society, we should provide a framework, and then we operate as farmers within that framework. And that framework, I would say Red Tractor in most cases would provide the basic standard, particularly with cross-compliance having gone. We know that the Environment Agency and Natural England and other bodies cannot really afford to enforce the law. So without cross-compliance, who's going to regulate where a consumer is going to get that insurance? So I think Red Tractor, I mean, personally, I think there are issues with Red Tractor, but I don't know enough about it to comment. In terms of this green bolt-on, I would just say they've handled it appallingly, and it's not surprising. The how they've done it is poor. The what is a different matter. It's really good to have a green assurance. A lot of people in milk systems with Arla, they will have bolt-ons to that. It's a normal arrangement to have bolt-ons within the dairy sector. I'm concerned about how it'll work and interact with the Sustainable Farming Incentive, environmental land management. What we know is that the price that we're paid, particularly in the red meat sector, does not reflect the cost of delivering all the public benefits that we as farmers produce. And so it's really critical that the society is not effectively expecting all those public benefits on the cheap. And that's why we need to make sure that we're not just sort of ratcheting up our demands on the public benefits without them being paid for by society. So yes, and then of course the other thing is around the trade deals. My view is that the government have really used agriculture as a pawn in terms of negotiations with other countries, and it could get worse if we have similar approaches with countries with even lower standards than Australia and New Zealand. And what we want to make sure is that the great thing is by having assurance that we can then set a standard against which other countries, if they're going to sell in Britain, have to meet those standards.
Thanks, Julia. And you mentioned the government, and just to say that as Farmers Weekly, we tried to get a DEFRA representative here, a Conservative Party representative here, but we couldn't get anybody. And I think that probably say, well, I won't comment on that, but we did try and we did pull out all of the stops to try and get somebody here to represent DEFRA and the government. Anybody from the audience like to make a point on Red Tractor at all? The gentleman there, could you say who you are, please?
I'm Stephen Love. I don't think anyone...
Sorry, Steve, just wait for the... Sorry, I should have said.
I don't think any farmer will disagree with the Red Tractor assurance. It's now how the farmers have to spend that much time in all what could be called niggles to get through, to get your certificate to be Red Tractor. You know, that's where a lot of the problem is. I'm not Red Tractor because of me parents are, and they take over a week to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to get it. I don't think it's the fact of having it. It's how we go about getting it, which it just goes too far. I think that's what the main problem is.
You see it as sort of mission creep, as it were, extending its remit beyond what
it's getting too detailed, where it's actually taking it away from maybe how you stock the basics of how Red Tractor started. They came out to the farm, they checked your stock, checked your sheds, your medicines, and all the rest of it. Everything was fine. That was it. You know, you got it. Now you're putting numbers on sheds, and it's too much detail that doesn't really need to be there, which is putting a lot of people off.
And you're a livestock farmer then?
A livestock farmer,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Could you pass the microphone sort of 3 rows forward and the gentleman there, please? Thank you. Just say who you are and where you're from.
Joel Prentice, arable farmer from the Scottish Borders. You took the words out of my mouth about mission creep. You were looking at Renewable Energy Directive and mass balance calculations. It's got absolutely nothing to do with practical farming whatsoever. It's a box tick exercise, but it's an absolute waste of time for every arable farmer. Yeah, that's the start of it, and it goes on and on and on.
Thank you very much. So we've heard the views there from livestock farming and arable farming. James Standen, the university farms here at Newcastle University, you've a wide range of enterprises, dairy, pigs, arable. What's your view on Red Tractor?
Well, I think I'm going to separate it out in 2 issues, and I'm going to agree with the rest of the panel that I think an audit function to prove that I am selling safe food, so my insurance works and everyone is secure in that, is important. I agree completely. What I have an issue with, and probably picking up on the mission creep is the term I've been used, is the sort of governance of Red Tractor. And, you know, we've seen the NFU Council this week pass a resolution for a pause in new modules and a governance review, and we've seen Red Tractor today release a statement to say they're carrying on with the Green Farm commitment. And you know, the NFU is an owner, a part owner along with AHDB and 4 other organisations. And I think that for an organisation that is owned by those members, to ignore what those people are saying and carry on regardless shows there's a clear failure in governance in that organisation. And I was rather hoping that Nicholas would come here tonight and go a little bit further with what the HDB might do. Certainly I am pushing for them to go a little bit further and agree with the NFU that there should be a governance review, that if they're going to take people to places, if the Green Farm commitment's important, and Julie mentioned Arla, and Arla have a green commitment, but I get rewarded up to 2 pence a litre for that they've done the standards in conjunction with a reward. Great, I'm all for that. Red Tractor haven't done that with the Green Farm commitment. And if they want to bring farmers along with them, do it in conjunction with them. Don't do it away from them and then impose it and say, we don't care what you think, we're going to carry on imposing it. So in terms of governance and bringing people along, the organisation is failing. And I think that the owner members of that organisation need to take responsibility for that and sort it out. Because otherwise we're going to lose the important audit function which it does provide for food safety, and so I can sell my product and the consumer's safe and know safe because I'm doing it in the right way.
Thank you, James. Nicholas Saphir, James is saying, can the AHDB go further? Should there be a governance review? Would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing is we actually have a moment in time when we can actually look at the whole of assurance, and particularly Red Tractor assurance, in depth and in a wider context of what we're trying to achieve. It was set up because there was a need to promote provenance of British product with an agreed standard, and also to try and get all audits to come together under a single audit. Now, it's failed on that partly, but it's still a very important feature. I think that the point that's being made about mission creep is very real, because I think it is not just about governance. It's about the inordinate tension there will always be by those who are, I mean, after all, part of the ownership is actually the British Retail Consortium. And so there will always be this tension between a ratcheting up and farmers actually saying, well, prove to us that not only is it necessary, but there is a return for doing that. And I think that if we go directly into purely talking about governance, then we're into this very difficult quagmire of saying who owns it and should it be owned more by farmers than by whatever. And I think that this is a moment of time to really go back to beginnings and say, look, the concept is assurance is vital to protect British farming, not just in terms of the consumer, but also in terms of provenance against competition. What is the competition doing? Are we doing more than we need to do? Is it mission creep in that sense? We need to understand that, and we need to do it on an evidential basis. Otherwise, we will be in a barn fight about who is going to have the power. Is it going to be the unions? Is it going to be farmers in general? Is it going to be alternatives? What's it going to be? So I think, yes, it is time that we actually look in depth at the way in which Red Tractor operates. Is that about purely governance? No, it's not. And that's why I don't think that just this feature, this focus on governance is good enough. I think we have to go much more into the depth of saying, what are we trying to achieve and how are we going to get there?
Thank you very much, Nicholas Saphir. Thank you. I'm going to go on to our second question. Stephen Love.
Hiya. Our farm at Weardale, over in County Durham, hill farmers. How should we best support Britain's small hill farmers?
Thank you, Stephen. How should we best support Britain's smaller hill farmers? Julia Aglionby.
Thank you. Well, great place, Weardale. I think at the moment it's just immensely tough, and we're not being supporting hill farmers well. So, I mean, personally, one of the reasons I've decided to stand for Parliament is because I have spent, of the last 4 to 6 years, I probably 10 to 15 hours a week talking to DEFRA Every 4 weeks, meeting with Janet Hughes, meeting with ministers, meeting with all sorts of civil servants, and honestly, I'm not sure how much difference I've made. So I look at the articles I wrote in the Farmers Guardian. Now that Farmers Weekly are talking to me, I always used to write for the Farmers Guardian, but anyway, but it's very nice to be here.
We've got broad shoulders.
Abby's brought me across, you see. So, but yeah, our big concern is, I remember writing, in 2016-17, effectively the risk is we're being put in a big river, you go down the Grand Canyon and you're in a canoe, but we've been sent down without a paddle. We've no idea where the rocks are, and it's pretty scary. So DEFRA themselves acknowledge that this year they expect less favoured area farming income to go down by 63%. So, that's really difficult. We know that basic payment scheme, direct payments in 2020 comprised 104% of farm business income, i.e. without basic payment, you lose money. And most hill farms are already significantly maxed out on stewardship payments. So if you're in stewardship once, like at home we are, I can't be in it twice. So I've just had it released, my SFI, it's just been, I expressed interest, and there isn't much I can go into. Because if you're already in, you can't be paid for doing it twice. So the answer is what's happening at the moment is completely unsatisfactory. In terms of what we should be doing is that we should make sure that we're actually rewarding the value of what people are providing. So the scheme payments need to be significantly higher. I do a lot of work looking at how much food is produced from the uplands, and I have to say I never run the food security argument from the uplands. Yes, great food is produced in the uplands, but let's not pretend we're going to feed Britain from the uplands. The food is, it's really important, the stock that goes down to the lowlands in terms of stratified sheep sector, we store cattle as well. But what's really critical is that it connects people of place. Yesterday I was in Great Langdale, National Trust hill farm tenant. Their income from their lambs is, say, £60,000 a year. From their glamping pods is, £150,000 to £200,000 a year. And they know that, but it is the package for the thousands of people who go to Great Langdale, the people who come to the uplands, who come there for refreshment, is that they are understanding where food comes from if we manage that properly. And we are so disconnected as a society from our food. And that's a huge one. At our farm at home, we have 3,800 people a year on the farm. We've diversified into education. We have 6 members of staff working in education. So my view is that we need to produce great food. We look after extraordinary archaeological sites. We provide access, and we provide nature in spades, and we can store carbon. It is a package, and at the moment we are very poorly rewarded. And the narrowness of environmental land management, only looking at nature and only looking at climate, is losing a huge number of the benefits that's provided. In terms of the size, if you're a small hill farmer, I would say that we need people on the land. I really worry about the depopulation. I worry about clearances by some estates. I know it's not all estates. There are some great estates, but there are some estates who the current incentive structures are encouraging on them not to relet their farms. So I would say we need stronger protection for tenants, stronger protection for commoners, and we need to pay properly. And at the moment, we are only paying 0.4% of government expenditure. It's going on managing 70% of the land. Lib Dems are promised another £1 billion. I hope other parties will be looking at the budget and paying a lot more for paying to farmers as a whole.
Thanks, Julia. Stephen, I'm going to come back to you in a moment and ask you how you'd like to be rewarded. But first, Julia, you mentioned this £1 billion extra for farmers. You say that farmers should be better rewarded. Where is that money going to come from?
Well, it's, as I say, that we spend £1 trillion each year. If we look at in terms of people's well-being, we know that the NHS cost, if we look at the Natural Health Service, if we look at society as a whole, if we look at well-being, it is a positive investment. Everything at the moment is so negative, isn't it? What we need to do is positively invest, and then we will reap back as a society. So we want to make sure that farmers' well-being. I'm doing some work on building a land and nature skills service in Cumbria. I was speaking to the Director of Public Health in Cumberland, and he said he's investing in land and nature skills service because that will be good for well-being. So what it is that it's all connected. And if we rely continuing on our national health service of provision of and hospitals, etc., what we want to do is make sure that the countryside provides, firstly, people eat really good food, and the poorer you are, the worse quality food you eat. And secondly, we need to make sure that people can get out and enjoy the countryside, and that there are careers in the countryside, many more careers in the countryside. So it's a false economy not to put that extra £1 billion in. And there's a lot of money that's been wasted on other things, whether we look at PPE contracts, if we look at, all sorts of public procurement, whether we're looking at how, High Speed 2 might be an example where if things had been better managed, we'd have had several £1 billion to invest. We could have invested for the next 10, 20 years, couldn't we, in our agriculture sector?
Thank you. Stephen, how would you like to be rewarded as an uplands farmer?
Well, it's a tentative farm that I run. Just to run the farm itself, I can't. I have to contract as well. That's 50% of my business. It is getting the just decent price for your produce. You have good produce. The more you get for that, for starters, the better you produce it. I'm going into schemes. The environmental schemes to try and get that. I mean, to be fair, over 12 months ago, for the schemes, I just went, no, I'm not. I'm just going to intensify. Then the price of fertiliser went up, and that went out the window a bit as well. So it's just fairness, because it is harder work in the hills, and I think we do need looking after a little bit better than it's always the big men that seems to gain from any schemes and things that comes in, and the up 500-acre smaller hill farms. It's always seem to be missing out, and it's harder and harder work.
Gentleman in front, and then the lady over there, please. Just say who you are and where you're from. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Alex Kay. I'm an agricultural consultant with ADAS. I work throughout the north with a lot of livestock farmers and small ones. And I think a key thing which gets overlooked is the inability or difficulty in being able to sell your own produce, your own meats direct to customers. And a big thing that's caused this is the dwindling amount of local abattoirs. So a bit of context, 1970, there was about 1,350 abattoirs. 2000, there was 350, and 2020, there is less than 150. So if you're not a big player, you can't get into these places. There's over demand for these big setups now, or it's just not economical to travel all the way to then get your produce sorted. So, yeah, I don't know if there's any comments from any of the panel as to where some more support can come for the smaller livestock farmers and the smaller abattoirs.
The government's underspent by £200 million last year.
I have started selling lamb and produce from my farm. Luckily, we do have a local abattoir at Whitney Weir, and I have actually started selling that because I can make my own stock worth more to myself.
Thank you. And just pass the... we've got another microphone just to invite. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Carmen Hubbard, reader in Agriculture, Economics and Policy. I'm struck by the question, and I'm also struck by the answers. And I know you said you want some to have a bit of challenge. And for me, as an agriculture economist, who worked here for about 20 years and knows the cap upside down and what happened, since Brexit. I'm still surprised that, farmers, the hill farmers, which they knew they will be the most affected by the new changes. They are still asking for money. I do not think they will come. And I just think that as a small farmers, you need to change the mindset. That rewards, they are gone. So the hill farmers, they're very dependent on the basic direct payments. 68%, some of them 90% of their farming was coming from direct payments. They will go. So they need to start thinking and see, what can I do to add some value to my product? And I'm delighted to hear that you said, you are starting thinking to sell your lamb outside. And that will give you some freedom. That will allow you to think how to take that forward. But you need to think and how to diversify and how to move on from where you are. Because if you are still waiting for the government, there will nothing happen. The million which Julia is proposing is great, but a million is nothing.
A billion.
A trillion.
A billion.
A billion. Okay, a billion sounds better than a million. But it's still, I just do think that we need to start thinking what we can do ourselves rather than thinking what the government could do for us. Because the government wouldn't do anything for us. We need to start thinking clearly how to take this sector forward based on our strengths and weaknesses. And we do need to compete in the world, even, because if if there will be a food shortage, we will need to think where the food will come. Would we think about the farm assurance schemes? Would we think that this comes from Australia? So I do think that we need a mind, I hope I said right, a change in our mindset of all of us, including farmers.
Thank you very much. And some of the things that you touched on there, we will hopefully cover in other questions, as you'll see. But Nicholas, Saphir, doing things for ourselves, building on our strengths, and also small abattoirs.
Well, let's start off with the fact that the world is changing, and particularly UK world is changing. Post-Brexit, global trade, cheap food policy, which we undoubtedly will talk about later on, all of those things are going to impact on all farmers, loss of direct payments. I think Julia is absolutely right in that this is a matter of protecting the rural economy and the social structure. I'm thinking particularly of a conversation we had before once about the Enclosure Acts and the unintended consequences that might flow from all of this. So I think it is about government policy, but I think you are absolutely right. Whatever we want out of government to support British agriculture, we have to recognise that whether it be this government renewed or a Labour government coming in, their priorities are going to be National Health Service, they're going to be education, they're going to be infrastructure. So we have to change. And the change for all of us is going to be, in some respects, quite specific. So for large arable farmers, it's going to be one thing. For large dairy farmers, it's going to be another. And for hill farmers, it's going to be another thing. And for hill farmers, I agree completely, by the way, that it is about adding value to what you have. It's about the government did actually put a small amount of money available to local abattoirs recently, but nothing like enough. And abattoirs are important, and adding value to red meat is critical. But I'm afraid it is going to be tough, and it is going to be about alternative incomes. It is going to be about contracting. It is going to be about adding value to your product. And there is no magic silver bullet there.
Thanks, Nick. John Ranner.
This is just a minefield. This is brilliant, this.
But
I can only agree with you. Stephen, I can only agree with you. But what we've done, we did it, and I'll give you our example of what we've done. We said, what is the lowest price we will sell our product for? What is it? The markets do fluctuate all the time, so we're beef and sheep producers. We've got to make money when that price is at its lowest. So when it's at its highest, we're making more money. So we have brought our cost of production down to its knees. And every time, my wife Helen just nudges me and says, cost of production, cost of production. So it comes down to how we manage our feed, how we manage our animals, animal welfare, getting more out of the animals for a longer period at a higher standard, becoming more sustainable, getting more produce out of the grass, using less fertilizers, relying on the soil. It goes on and on and on. It's just a continual minefield of improvement within our business. And it gets down to how we control our rents, our mortgages, our interest rates. Everything has got to be improved. And we take every single product and we break it down and we'll try and improve it by 1%, and we'll take 10 things and reduce the cost by 1%, and all of a sudden you've saved 10% on the cost of production. And the other thing is adding value. Adding value, I take my hat off to you. What you're doing with selling things straight from the farm gate, that it's so hard. We've got so far to travel to our nearest slaughterhouse. We've got to travel from North Northumberland to Durham. And so you take your livestock down there, drop it off, you come back empty, then you've got to go back down to pick it up and trying to find the markets. And it's so hard with what you're doing. You add in value. But you've then got to tailor your business, and you mustn't try and produce something that your land can't produce. So for instance, you'll never be a potato farmer. You're in the uplands. And leave that to the, but you see people, it's an extreme comment, but you see people trying to produce things in areas that they just can't produce, and it won't do it. The growing season's not there. And the final thing is attention to detail. And yes, we've got to diversify, but actually what we're doing and how we're producing it, it's our attention to detail at every opportunity to try and get it right. If we look at the bigger farmers, I know I do, and you go, wow, look how well they're doing. But actually, their average yields or their average production is lower than mine. And we're talking about producing, a world of food poverty and not producing enough food. The only way we'll do it is by having lots of smaller farmers. That's the only way we're going to be self-sufficient in this country for food.
Thank you. I'm going to go on to the next question because we've sort of touched on it, and I think it deserves a greater discussion. Alex, and I apologise if is it Massiver?
McIver, but don't worry.
Alex, just say who you are and so we...
So Alex McIver Redwood from Durham University, but I've grown up on a farm in Cornwall who supplies Riverford. And there very often seems to be talk about how we should have more practices for farms to be more kind to the environment, as well as there's pushes for farmers just to get better prices in general. But on the other side, there is the cost of living crisis. So my question is, should British consumers be paying more for food?
Thank you very much, Alex. Brave person coming from Durham University into Newcastle. But should British consumers be paying more for food? Ellen Holmes from Food Newcastle, you work with local communities here in the city. Should people be paying more for their food?
I mean, it's such a difficult question when you do see the level of food insecurity in the city. To think then to hike the price up for the general public, like 53.8% of homes in Newcastle are considered to be in deprivation. So then to think we're going to hike that price of food up, I think for me, it's thinking about how we can reimagine the supply chain, because as well as that number of homes being in deprivation in Newcastle, 25% of farmers are considered under the poverty line. So they're not winning on either side of that supply chain. It's the middleman there that is obviously hiking up those prices, creating the issue of the cost of living. So generally, I think not. I think it's about looking at how we can adapt the supply chain to better suit the producers and the consumers.
Thank you very much. James Standen, should British consumers be paying more for food?
Oh, yes. No, I think probably where I would come from with this is I think there probably needs to be more equity in the market and a fairer distribution of funds. We see the share in, for meat that goes into a supermarket, for product, any product for wheat that goes in, the share back to the farmer is low. And so equity along that supply chain, as Ellen said, whether we've got to reimagine how the supply chain works, so there's a fairer distribution of reward across the supply chain. So I think the yes and no answer, flippantly, yes, of course, farmers would like more money for their product, but I think they'd be happier with a fairer distribution of the money that produce creates, where the supermarkets sell, if there was a fairer and more equitable distribution of that money.
Alex, thank you, James. Alex, what do you think yourself? Should consumers be paying more for food?
I'd actually bring it back to what Julia said earlier about the NHS and how much we spend on that. Because very often, if we invest in healthier food, it might often be more expensive, but as a society, we'll be paying less on certain health conditions as well. So I kind of think that it can be worth it, because when you look at the whole picture, we'll be saving money.
Thank you. I mean, Ellen, this is one of the challenges, isn't it? That some of the cheapest food is some of the unhealthiest.
Yeah, definitely, and that's why, as food partnerships, we're part of a national food partnership network called Sustainable Food Places, and we've really been lobbying for the government to create an effective food strategy, because I think that's where it all comes from. Is there isn't the support on teaching people how to cooking skills. There isn't the support on the nutrition side of things, and then that, like you say, drips down to the food insecurity. People can't afford, nutritious food, and also might not know what to do with that nutritious food. So naturally, they might go to the more unhealthy food. So, yeah, I think it really comes from the top in terms of establishing a UK-wide food strategy, a local food strategy for the city, and a regional for the North East as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Nick Saphir and then to Julia Aglionby.
Okay, let me put some difficult facts on the table. We have the second or third cheapest food in the developed world in Britain. The French and Germans spend 30% per capita more on food and drink than we do. That's fact. The reason why we did not have cucumbers and tomatoes on the counter last spring, whereas the French and the Germans and the Belgians and the Danes did, was because actually cucumbers, for example, in France, were £1 per cucumber more expensive than they were here, and so the Spaniards sent them there. So there is an issue about whether or not we can sustain the cheap food policy that we have in what is going to become a more volatile world. However, and that comes back to Ellen's point, we have a social problem. We have an affordability problem on food. So what we've done is we've given everybody cheap food, as opposed to focusing where actually we need to put that food at the right price for people to be able to afford. The Americans have, America of all places, have coupons. But leave that aside. So the first point I'd make is there is a conundrum here, and it's not an easy one to solve. The second point I'd make, which is made by James at the beginning, was that we need a redistribution of margin within the supply chain. I've heard that many times. The problem is, if you'd said that 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said absolutely. If you look at retail margins today, they've gone from 14% down to 2 to 3%, and some of the big retailers are actually losing money. Lidl, for example, losing money. So redistribution isn't the easy answer either. So I think what we have to recognise is that we have a conundrum here. Politicians are not going to vote for higher prices. Clearly, we do have to have higher prices. Clearly, we have to deal with a social problem. That conundrum can only be dealt with by two things, either by government, in terms of finding ways in terms of providing socially affordable food, or by taking it on ourselves to deal with the issue. And here there's another interesting point. That, for example, if you take the dairy industry, we run on farm 2p a litre generally, on average, behind the average European price. And the reason is because 50% of our milk goes into bottling, and bottling liquid, which used to be the golden return, has become the dog because retailers are using it as the price maker to show how competitive they are. It's our fault as an industry for allowing that focus on bottled milk. We ought to be doing much more about adding value. And for example, on cheese, where we export, we make a far higher return than we do if we sell it in the UK. So we are not good enough on exports. Where across the industries we actually export well, and I'd say lamb, I'd say pork, our returns are higher than average European returns on farm, where we do not export, where we are totally dependent on UK retail, then we do worse. So I think that there's a very, very difficult problem here to unpick, but it has to be unpicked. And yes, it does include higher prices for consumers in the long term. And whether we like it or not, we are going to find in the very long term, even with a stable world population, 1 billion more people by 1940 in sub-Saharan Africa to be fed. We're going to find a growing middle class in the Far East with a higher income, which is going to be pulling product out of Australia, New Zealand, South America, North America, and we are going to be competing for imported foods because we are an importing country if we do not get our own act together. So I think it's an area of great public policy concern, but we can do more about it ourselves by particularly opening up new markets.
Thanks, Nicholas. Julia Aglionby, Nicholas says politicians are not going to vote for higher prices. Should consumers pay more for food?
Well, the issue here is poverty. It's not food poverty, it's poverty. And there are a huge number of people who simply, if we look at the cost of living, they are not able to afford their basic requirements. So if we look at, say, there are about 2 million people on universal credit. The universal credit for a single person is £85 a week, and that's not including your rent. That's the rent housing benefit. And the essentials, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation say you require £120. Now, I'm not going to want to have the discussion about whether people should or shouldn't be in work, but even if you look at the minimum wage, it's very difficult to live on the minimum wage, particularly as a single person. Similarly, as a couple, there's a big shortfall there. So one of the challenges is that basic payment wasn't a subsidy for farmers, it was a subsidy to consumers for cheap food. And so, we talk about it as subsidies, it's really bad, I don't like that word. Farmers are being rewarded, if they're receiving money from the public purse, they're being rewarded for delivering a service because the price they're paid at the till isn't sufficient to cover the costs of production. Currently, milk, the cost of producing milk is about 25%. The amount you get paid is about 25% less for many farmers than the amount they're being paid with a recent drop in milk prices. So, yeah, unfortunately, the rhetoric of the current government, the Conservative Party, and their sort of libertarian approach is that we can always bring it in from overseas. But as we saw with those crisis around salads, etc., my daughter was working in Marseille, and in fact, it wasn't that much more expensive. She was living on a low wage as a sort of agency babysitter, and she had no problem. She'd send me pictures every day of the supermarkets full. She went to local markets in the street, and you could eat well at a reasonable price. So it's really critical that we make sure that people have enough money to eat good food, and that means steadily increasing the minimum wage, and that way people can then afford to pay properly for their food. But it's complex. It's not simply, as people have said, it's around the supply chain as well, and I think we're being naive, and also feeding the nation is one of the most, making sure people have enough food to eat is actually a critical national security issue. And if we don't make sure that we have enough food and that people are well fed and they can contribute to society. So, for instance, free school meals, one way to make sure people aren't in food insecurity is to make sure that all children in primary school have free school meals and all children on universal credit have free school meals. People will be able to function much better and contribute to society. So there are lots of ways we can make sure, and that procurement should be buying British food. We should make sure that public procurement for our prisons, for our hospitals, for our schools should all come for buying British food. And if we had those commitments, and that is the commitment of the Liberal Democrats, and it's not the commitment of the current government.
Thank you, Julia. You've sort of touched on the next question, but before we move on to the next question, we don't have any buzzers or buttons to press or anything like that, but it'd just be quite interesting to ask the audience, who thinks consumers should pay more for food? So it looks like people are sort of thinking about it before putting their hands up, which I guess is good. So who thinks that consumers shouldn't pay more for food? I think there's quite a few people probably abstained, but maybe maybe slightly more think people should pay more for food than shouldn't. But we're going to move on to the next question, and we've probably, officially we've probably got about 15-20 minutes left, but we can overrun a little bit, but perhaps not too much. But Mary Almond.
Hello.
Sorry, Mary. Just wait for the microphone. I should have said. Thank you.
Mary Almond. I've retired now, but I did farm management accounts. It's been touched on several times, but does this government care about food security?
Does the government care about food security? John Renner.
Oh, I haven't even had time to think about that one. Do you want a knee-jerk reaction? No. That's a knee-jerk reaction. I don't think they do. They've got their plate is full of so many other things to think about. And as it's been alluded to quite a few times so far, they can import it, apart from cucumbers last summer. They can import it, and they just don't seem to be concerned about are we 65% self-sufficient in beef and lamb? Is that right? Somewhere around there? And we've got to import it. So all of a sudden we get a problem such as the war in Ukraine. Wheat prices hurtle up. Farmers are clapping their hands together for some reason, and then fertiliser hurtles up as well just after it. But all of a sudden people felt, or people were led to understand, that the price of wheat that had increased because of the price, because of what was happening in Ukraine, had led to an increase in the price of bread in the supermarkets. And there was just no relationship to the amount of flour that was actually going into the breads. And so are they bothered about food security? I don't think they are. They seem to let the markets do themselves.
Thanks, John. Ellen, food security can work. When, as farmers, we often think about food security on a national level, but you work with food security and food insecurity at a very local level. Do you see the government being concerned about food security at the level at which you work with local communities, local businesses here in Newcastle?
No, not at all. Like we kind of touched on in the last answer, a food strategy is essential, and I'm coming here from Newcastle West End Food Bank. They're the host of our food partnership, and I see that on the front line in terms of the actual insecurity in the community. 39% more food parcels were handed out this March than the last March. It's the busiest and biggest food bank in the UK. Don't fact check me on that. I'm just going to throw that out there. But
certainly one of them, if not the.
Well, yeah, I've seen articles that have said it is. So, this just nothing being done, even in terms of the food prices. You can look at the parcels going up, the demand and need for emergency food provision going up, but so has the supermarket food prices, and donations aren't meeting that demand and that need. So then the food banks are having to go out and actually purchase that food from supermarkets at that cost. It's not a sustainable business model, and there needs to be more government action to support organisations like that who are working directly with the community.
Thank you. James?
I think if we look at the direction of travel with the schemes the government are announcing, if we look at the trade agreements that they are signing, I worry that they don't think about food security and they don't recognise its importance. And, it is a worry. Now, the government says they're only going to fund, things that are public goods, and a lot of farmers will put on social media about producing food is social good. I don't necessarily think food production is a public good, but I think our ability to produce that food and provide food security and feed the extra billion people that are coming is a public good, and it's important, and the government should be funding that. I think probably our job as farmers, as consumers, is to press upon current government, future MPs, how important it is so they can take that forward and actually deliver something, whether that's a national food strategy, whether that's a rethinking of the schemes and how they fund and how we maintain that capacity to produce that food. I think it's very important we carry on lobbying government and making sure they recognise its importance and do something about it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Julia and then I'm going to ask Nick. I've got a feeling I might know what you're going to say, Julia, but does this government care about food security? Well,
not enough. I mean, that certainly, and if they say they do, I think there's a level of complacency. There's an assumption. And it's extraordinary. You go back into history, you don't have to look back very far to say, I mean, admittedly, before the Second World War, we were less than 30% self-sufficient in food. So, we were at a very, very low level. And of course, after the Second World War, there was a huge effort. And potatoes were grown in a lot of places that, in the uplands during the Second World War. So you can grow, but it's not ideal. But the question, at the moment, we need to be in a position where we need to encourage the right sort of food in the right place. And there's an peer I admire enormously called Alf Dubbs, and he said to me, I sat lunch with him, and he said, Julia, what would you do if you were Secretary of State for the day? And I said I would implement the National Food Strategy. So I think there's an awful lot of good in Henry Dumbleby's report when we look at an integrated approach to producing enough food within the country. But of course, we're not going to grow avocados and we're not going to grow coffee, but we grow food to meet, as much as we can to meet the requirements. We look at a healthy diet, we make sure that and we look at the environmental impacts. So we look at what an economist would call internalizing the externalities. So we make sure that the impacts of producing food, we make sure we take into account those in our form of production. But I would say no. The short answer is no. The question is what do we do about it? And I think we need to be really careful, as I say, I'm very pro producing having more nature recovery and more climate, but we need to think, where are we doing that? And the land use framework is very important. So I'm a commissioner of the Food Farming and Countryside Commission and been putting a lot of pressure on the government, who claim they're going to be doing a land use framework. But it's really important that we don't see there's land south of Penrith that's producing really good dairy farms. They've been told by their landlord, they effectively want it out. They're saying, we want you to do one cut of silage a year. We want to change what you're doing. Any tenancy that's come up is not being relet. The land is taken in hand and rewilded. Now, fine, 5 to 10% of England is rewilded. That's not a problem. But when we're rewilding the Eden Valley, which is one of the primary milk-producing valleys in the country, Cumbria produces the second largest milk producer, then is that really the right way to be running our food structure? It's a lack of planning.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, just say who you are, where you're from.
Saphir Long, a PhD student at Newcastle University. Do you think there's an underlying issue with the education sector in providing enough detail on the food strategy that we should have in place and healthy eating and providing good food? A lot of people don't know where their food comes from. Do you think that the education sector, not just the agricultural sector, can make an impact from young ages? That's
a big question, but we can take it. But could you just keep it really, really brief?
Yeah. Well, the answer is the education set. It's not sufficient, and that's why we have 6 people working on our farm doing education. So and we make sure we're having people out, often 5 to 10 groups a week. And encouraging people to go into that sector to make it a really positive career. But everybody should learn where their food comes. The problem is at the moment, is what I was saying, is that if you can't afford to even think about your food, then it's really difficult. You can give people all the education they want. Most mothers and fathers don't give their children bad food because they want to. They give that because they haven't got the alternatives.
I'm going to come back to, you've got a question down here. If we carry on with this one, you won't get to ask the one that you're down to ask. But thank you, Saphir. It's Nick Saphir.
Just a quick one on that. Of course we need to better educate people in what is good food. There's a real issue around that. But come back to the question. Has the government got a policy, and I'm not going to make a political statement here, the Prime Minister has said that he is committed to 60% self-sufficiency. it'd be interesting to see what happens and how you deliver that. There was a high degree of complacency in terms of the resilience of the food industry to be able to supply food during COVID and then during Ukraine. And I think that was shaken by what happened last spring in terms of the weather changes and cucumbers and tomatoes, which is only indicative of a problem. We need to differentiate between food security and self-sufficiency. They are two different subjects. And the other thing we have to recognize is that we have, for nearly 200 years now, a view of the world for Britain that says we can import food anywhere, from anywhere, to feed ourselves, and that's why the trade agreements that are being struck do not have food at their forefront. And one of the interesting things is the reason why the French, for example, and the Germans don't think that way is because our empire was essentially a temperate zone empire. Our empire was Australia, New Zealand, North America. Theirs was subtropical and tropical Africa and the Far East. And so they imported tropical and subtropical foods. We imported temperate foods. And after the repeal of the Corn Laws, that's what we did. So I think there's a long history here that is a real issue. But for sure, I mean, I have a view that would say, I think probably mirrored by everybody, that if you look at the future, apart from volatility, as I said before, you're going to have people around the world who need to buy food from other places. Far East, it'll be the lack of water, the lack of the right food, higher middle class income. Sub-Saharan Africa, it'll be sheer numbers. And we will be competing, and we are going to be poorer in comparative terms than we were 10 years ago, in comparative terms. And that means that we do need to have more product that is freely available here at the right prices. Now, how you do that, I agree completely, by the way, that it is about a land use framework. There is a lot of land in this country that could be better used to do other things, public goods things, but we need to make sure that that land that can produce food is producing food sustainably but well.
Thank you. Mary, do you think?
No, that's great. It's just the importance of food, really.
Okay. Thank you. We are running out of time, but just time to say that this is the first of 4 new Farmers Weekly Question Time events. Next month we will be at the Royal Welsh Showground at Booth Wells for the Welsh Winter Fair. In January, we'll be at the Great Yorkshire Showground in Harrogate, and in February, we will be at Rothamsted Research at Harpenden in Hertfordshire. And if you would like to be in the audience at any of those events, you can register at fwi.co.uk/question time. Our next question, it doesn't really touch, I guess, on a land use framework, but types of farming, or certainly methodology and almost farming philosophy. Colin Stubbs. We will have to sort of speed up the answers to these questions.
Well, I'll keep it simple. Is the future of farming regenerative?
Is the future of farming regenerative? I'm going to ask the farmers on the panel, starting with James Standen.
I think that the farming systems have got to change, and whether we label that as regenerative, and I won't go into the debate of what regenerative is because it doesn't really seem to have a meaning. So I think farming systems will change. I think they will think about their inputs a lot more. I think they will think about their outputs. They'll think about how those systems will work. And if they can do that in conjunction with nature, that's great. If that's regenerative, then I think that a lot of farming will go that way. But I do think farming will change.
Thank you, John. And I know
it's going to be an echo, isn't it?
We had a little bit of a discussion about this before the event in terms of what regen ag actually means, but without getting bogged down in that.
I agree with James. It's going to change. It's going to change hugely, and it's going to change very quickly. We've got to produce more from less, and it's got to be better, and it's got to have less impact on the environment.
Thank you. Julia?
Absolutely, would totally agree. So some people in terms of the uplands, there's quite a lot of work done on paper less is more. I know it can be quite controversial, but it's all about what John was saying earlier about optimising your inputs for your particular system, and it's being really tough on yourself. So we've done this at home, and you really look at where am I making my money and where am I putting my inputs in, how much labour am I putting in. We pay for every hour of labour, and that's apart from what I'm doing is at the weekends. But and it's really critical, once you value your labour, you have to think, because all our labour as farmers has an opportunity cost. You need to think what you're doing. In terms of the cost of energy, I think that will be the defining thing as we go forward. Cheap fertiliser is not going to be available, and I think people need to really look at those inputs carefully. So that if that is regenerative, then the answer is yes.
Thank you. Nicholas, Saphir, the AHDB, you serve a broad church of farmers right across the board. Some of the agricultural community, some farmers are fully on board with what regen is, what they believe it is, and are farming that way. Others, it's a big turn-off. Do you think the future of farming is regenerative?
I mean, like everybody else, let's not get hung up on the definition. I think that the world is changing. I think that we have to extract more for our inputs, and we have to do it in a sustainable way. And that's very much around the sort of things that AHDB are focused on, particularly on the arable side at the moment, in terms of, for example, recommended lists and RB209 and best use of soils. And I think all of that is going to be absolutely critical. And I think also that if you take the livestock industry, we are going to have to increasingly look to how we actually produce better quality livestock, better quality animal protein with lower inputs or and better sustainability. Now, all of that's for real. I mean, that's a motherhood statement, but it's a lot of work to be done, both in terms of institutionally, AHDB acting as service, but also by farmers.
And in terms of the work to be done, I can't sort of take this. We can't really have tonight without touching on the fact that you're putting up your levy rates to do more of this kind of work. Is that right, or is it?
Right. So look, we've spent the last 3 years doing what I think has been absolutely necessary in terms of reducing our costs, making sure that we are as lean as we can be, making sure we're listening to what farmers say they want in terms of services from us, both in terms of production, but also in terms of markets. I think we're doing all of that. We've now got to the point where we've cut as far as we can, and we are looking at, we're saying to our councils, our sector councils, and they're all different. We're saying to them, what is it you really need for the future? And from a zero-based budget, let's build that up as to what it will cost. And what it will cost is actually more than the current levy. I mean, the levies have stayed static for 10 years. Actually, on dairy, it's been 20 years. That's not an argument for increasing, but I'm just saying that's where we are. So if agriculture, if levy payers want the sort of services that AHDB councils think they ought to be providing, having taken sounding from farmers, then yes, we have to have an increase in levy. And we're out for consultation, for discussion. We'll get feedback. So far, we're getting extremely strong feedback that the principle of an increasing the levy for the services that are being postulated is right, with, of course, and quite rightly, constraints and saying you've got to perform. But this is not an ideal time to ask for an increase. but if you actually look at the needs of the industry, if you look at the services that we've been asked to provide, then the decision has to be made. Either the levies go up or we have to cut back the programs. And I sincerely hope it'll be about the levies going up, because actually in real terms, it isn't a great deal of money. That's the important thing. I mean, if you talk about 0.02p per litre of milk, or if you talk about 15 pence a lamb, this is not an enormous amount of money. It hurts, and your point is absolutely right. You've got to look at every cost, but look at the value of the services.
Thank you, Nicholas. Our penultimate question, Chris Spencer. Chris, just wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Well, for ourselves at the moment, we're going through looking at the new countryside stewardship schemes, and we're upland farmers again, and basically I seem to think that at the moment it seems the environmental schemes seem to reward the farmer who've done the least in the past. In other words, those who've got the biggest mess are going to get paid for it, whereas people who've looked after their things up to now, we've got British ground at the moment that seems going to get very little out of it because it's been looked after well for years.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. So the question is, why do environmental schemes seem to reward the farmers who've done the least in the past? In other words, if you've done the right thing, as it were, and you've got lots of hedgerows, for example, it's hard to plant more. But if you've taken them out in the past, you can be paid to put them back. As a very base, I guess, example. But why do environmental schemes seem to reward the farmers who have done least in the past? John Renner, is that something that you experience? That
I do really get frustrated because actually we've been, let's call it sustainable farming. We've been sustainable farming now for 20 years. We've been looking at what we do. We monitor and control and manage, and we plant hedges, we allow them to thicken out, we plant corners, we make the farm is so diverse. We record plants, we record wildlife, we do everything to make sure all our actions are improving the environment in which we're farming. But that runs alongside making sure we're producing more from less, as I said earlier. Would I agree with you? I think there's a day of reckoning coming. There's a bit of smile on my face. When it was announced the government were changing the way they were going to spend subsidised farming, I got on the phone to Caroline Drummond, which she used to be the CEO of Leaf, and I just said, Caroline, we must be so happy. And she just said, there's so much more work to do yet. Would I agree with you? I suppose yes, I do. I do agree with you.
Thanks, John. James, is that something that's true in your experience, that environmental schemes reward farmers who've done the least in the past? Frustration?
It is, but I guess if it's a government strategy that they want more land in environmental schemes, then they've got to encourage everyone. I suppose it does stick in the throat a little bit when you've done all the things you should be doing and you're not properly rewarded for it, and someone else comes along. So, yes, I think that probably it would seem so. I would hope that the new schemes will change that. I don't know that they will, but I think you are. I guess I agree with John that you're probably right. They are, but I think the government has targets, and they're going to incentivise. But I would like to see the people who have done it and done a good job for a while rewarded in a sort of a sufficient manner and to what it's worth, what they've done.
Thank you. I'm actually going to leave. I'm going to leave that one there. But I've got three more questions here, but they are all kind of similar, and I'm going to sort of roll them into one. I don't know whether Edward Dunger is here, but he asked, should UK farmers be optimistic about the next decade? Adam Bedford, who I know is here, asked, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self? And I'm sort of going to roll those in. They are vaguely similar to the one that Saphir has submitted. Do you want to ask your question? This is the one about there's somebody starting out in agriculture, and this is the last question. We always like to try and end on an upbeat note, no matter how challenging the evening. So, Saphir, take it away.
Well, that was my line. You've taken that away. So, so as someone starting out in my career in agriculture, what skills and attributes will I require to be successful?
Thank you very much. As someone that's starting out in agriculture, what skills and attributes will I require to be successful? Ellen, I'm not going to start with you, but I would like to ask you, after everybody else has had their say, what you think farmers should be delivering from your point of view. I'm just going to go down the table, I think. So, James Standen.
I think you need to be optimistic. I think you need to look at things in a positive route. You've obviously done the right thing coming to Newcastle and getting educated in the right way. I thought I ought to get the advert in there somewhere. And so, it's equip yourself with tools. It's talk to other people, learn what's going on. But I think you've got to be optimistic. The other two questions: what advice would I give my 20-year-old self, or do I look to be optimistic? I do worry about the changes, but I think there will be opportunities there, and you need to put yourself in the right position to take advantage.
Thank you very much, James. Julia Aglionby.
When I turned 21, I was captain of ploughing at Oxford, and we beat Newcastle. First time the ladies at Oxford had won the ploughing competition for 30 years, so we were really pleased. I did then come to Newcastle to do my PhD, so I have split loyalties. But Newcastle are the only people who can drink heavily all day and plough very well. But I would say, so yeah, my advice was, don't try and drink and drive a tractor, try and plough. In terms of skills and attributes, you need an enormous amount of patience, you need energy, you need very good mental health, and lots of support. It's really, really tough. You need a lot of hard work, and we're developing in Cumbria this Land and Nature Skills Service, and we have the Chamber of Commerce, we have the University of Cumbria, we have the Farmer Network, and we have Cumbria Wildlife Trust, and we have our two unitary authorities. And it's really essential that we're supporting everybody from effectively, we ideally would start at 3 years old, but we're starting initially at 16. We're going to do 3 to 16 as place-based learning. And it's about integrating, it's about land and understanding a lot more. The stock skills among most farmers are superb. What's a huge challenge and what we're finding is how do we understand to make most use of the land-based assets of the soil, of how we can really make sure that you can build a business that delivers across the breadth of outputs that society is looking for. And then the key is how do you get paid for doing all of that? And then the final thing is you need the legal rights in order to make sure that you don't invest in all of that and then someone takes that tenancy from under you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Nicholas Saphir.
Food is going to matter more than ever, not just in terms of volume, but in terms of quality, in terms of health. Markets are going to grow. It's interesting, everybody talks about the decline in animal protein consumption. World consumption of animal protein is going up by 2% a year, but it's not in Europe, it's not in the UK, it's in the Far East. We export an enormous amount of, for example, pork to the Far East and beef and lamb. So markets are growing. The opportunities in terms of technology are going to be absolutely fantastic for the future. So what skills? Inquisitive, determined, adaptable, and optimistic. And then I think, yes, I am optimistic for those people who come into the industry with those views.
Thanks, Nicholas. John Renner.
What fun. I wish I was 21. Started my business when I was 27, and never ever look over the hedge at what your neighbour's doing. Have your own plan and go for it. Someone said you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as hard as you speak. And I think that's it. Just go for it. Go for it.
And Ellen.
I think it's just about connecting with communities and people that you wouldn't normally hear in different voices and perspectives. I'm doing that today because as an urban food partnership, we don't connect with people in agriculture very often, and I've learnt a lot today, and I just think it really broadens your worldview by connecting with people that maybe you wouldn't normally engage with.
Thank you very much. Saphir, is almost a shopping list of farming for the future? Is that?
Yeah, I think it's promising. And I'm not from an agricultural background myself, but I feel as if I'm welcomed into, the education sector, but also the practical sector as well. So, no, it's good to hear that, no offence, the older generation feel excited about what the younger generation are going to bring. And, it's promising. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, everybody. I apologise if you didn't get to answer your question. At least some of the panel, I hope, will be around for for drinks and nibbles afterwards. But for now, that's it, ladies and gentlemen, for this evening's Farmers Weekly Question Time. Thank you all for coming and for making this evening such a success. Thank you too to our sponsors, the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture. And if you are looking to start out in agriculture or indeed develop your career, do look at TIA's website, the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture. And also thanks to Lightsource BP. If you're looking at renewable energy enterprises, or in particular solar on your farm, do check them out. And thank you both of them for making this evening possible. Thank you too to Newcastle University for hosting us. It's a great venue. It's a great city, and the more that I come here, the more that I do like the North East and Newcastle in particular. And thank you to our panel, Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate Julia Aglionby, AHDB Chairman Nicholas Saphir, Northumberland farmer John Renner, Newcastle University Farms Director James Standen, and Food Newcastle Partnership Coordinator Ellen Holmes. You've all been absolutely great, and you all deserve a big round of applause. And thank you, everybody, and have a safe journey home.